The candles flickered softly on the white tablecloth, casting a romantic glow on Chloe's expectant face. She smiled, her eyes shining with anticipation, completely unaware that this Valentine's Day dinner, in this upscale Seattle restaurant, was about to be anything but romantic for her. I watched her, my heart thrumming a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs, and knew the moment was here. The waiter had just cleared our appetizer plates, a fancy burrata that Chloe had barely touched, too excited to eat, and promised our main courses were coming soon. I reached across the table, taking both of Chloe's hands in mine. Her eyes immediately welled up, not with sadness, but with what she believed was overwhelming joy. I could see the triumphant smile starting to form on her lips, the kind I'd seen countless times on Instagram posts from newly engaged women. She thought this was it. The moment she'd been engineering for months. I took a deep breath, looking her right in the eyes. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady, "I need to tell you something important." She nodded enthusiastically, a silent, "Yes, yes, ask me," hanging in the air between us. Then I delivered the words I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in my head, "I don't want to marry you. I never want to marry you. And this relationship is over." I watched her face go through at least 5 distinct emotions in the span of 2 seconds. First, a blank confusion, as if the words simply hadn't registered. Then, a sharp shock as the meaning began to sink in. Disbelief followed, a flicker across her features suggesting this must be some kind of terrible joke. Then, raw anger, as she realized I was completely, unequivocally serious. Finally, a crushing devastation that almost made me feel bad. But then I remembered everything that had led us to this exact, inescapable moment. She snatched her hands away from mine as if I'd burned her, staring at me with her mouth agape. 10 seconds passed in absolute silence, the longest I'd ever known Chloe to be quiet. Then the questions came, a frantic, desperate torrent. What do you mean? Is this because of the ultimatum? Is there someone else? I explained, calmly, as if discussing the weather, that you don't threaten someone with their replacement if you genuinely love them. I told her that the moment she gave me that deadline about Nathan, she'd shown me exactly what I was worth to her, conditional, with an expiration date, like a business contract. Marriage, I said, should stem from love and mutual choice, not from emotional blackmail. I simply refused to build a life with someone who'd already proven she'd use pressure and threats to get what she wanted. Chloe's face, which had been pale with shock, turned a furious shade of red. She started getting loud. Not quite yelling, but certainly loud enough that the couple at the next table shot us a concerned glance. She accused me of wasting her time, of leading her on, of promising her a future. I sat there, thinking about how none of that was actually true, because I'd only ever tried to be honest about my feelings. She even accused me of planning this whole thing just to humiliate her. And to be honest, she wasn't entirely wrong. I could have ended it in the privacy of her apartment, but I knew then she'd just use tears and emotional manipulation to guilt me into staying, just like she always did. I needed a public setting, a neutral ground, where she couldn't pull me back into her orbit. Our waiter approached, looking deeply uncomfortable. He asked if everything was all right. "We're fine," I told him, "but could you bring out any dessert that might have been ordered ahead of time?" Chloe stared at me, utterly confused. But based on her extreme confidence, I had a strong suspicion something special was waiting in the kitchen. The waiter nodded slowly, looking relieved to escape, and disappeared. Chloe stood up, her voice venomous. "You're going to regret this." She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone, presumably to call an Uber. She stood there next to the table for what felt like an eternity, waiting, and neither of us said another word. Then, the waiter returned, carrying a small plate with what looked like a custom chocolate dessert. As he got closer, I could read the words written across the top in elegant white frosting, "Say yes." The whole situation became so absurd that I almost started laughing. Chloe had apparently pre-ordered this dessert weeks ago, probably right after she'd given me the ultimatum, assuming I'd proposed during dinner and this would be the perfect celebratory touch. The waiter stood there, deeply confused. Chloe's face went from angry to utterly mortified as the full implications of the dessert hit her. I looked at the dessert, then at her, and said, "Well, that's really something." She turned and walked as fast as she could in those expensive heels toward the exit, leaving me alone at the table, with the say yes dessert and the attention of half the restaurant. The waiter came back after a moment and asked if I still wanted the check. I said yes, and apologized for the scene. He actually chuckled, saying he'd seen much worse breakups during his years at the Cascades, which made me feel slightly better. The bill came out to $147. A small price, I thought, for my freedom. I left him a $40 tip. He had definitely earned it. To understand how we ended up at that table, under those impossibly romantic lights, with an engagement dessert I never ordered, we have to go back. Way back. My name is Alex. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. But here we are. This whole situation was so wild, I still sometimes can't believe it actually happened. It started about 2 years ago, at my cousin's wedding in downtown Seattle. One of those huge events, 300 guests, open bar, a DJ who thought that Cupid Shuffle 3 times was a good idea. I was near the bar, trying to avoid my aunt's probing questions about my single status, when this absolutely stunning woman walked up and ordered a vodka cranberry. Her name was Chloe Peterson. She was 29, worked as a marketing executive for a tech startup, and she had this presence that made everyone in the room glance her way. We started talking. She laughed at my terrible jokes about the wedding cake. By the end of the night, we were dancing to songs we both pretended to hate. Honestly, it felt like something out of a romantic comedy. The first year with Chloe was genuinely great. We traveled to Austin, San Diego, and even flew out to Denver for a long weekend. We'd stay up late talking about everything from philosophy to our favorite childhood cartoons. The physical chemistry was electric. She had this apartment in Capitol Hill with huge windows overlooking the city. I had my place in Fremont. We didn't live together, but we were together almost every night. Her friends loved me. My friends thought she was gorgeous and fun. My mom kept dropping hints about grandchildren every time we had Sunday dinner. Everything seemed perfect. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself, even when the subtle red flags started appearing around the 1-year mark. Looking back, I should have asked myself, have you ever ignored warning signs in a relationship because you were too invested to see them clearly? The marriage hints started small. Chloe would send me Instagram posts of engagement rings with captions like "just browsing," or she'd point out couples getting engaged at restaurants with a look in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. Then her best friend got engaged, and suddenly every conversation became about weddings. She started buying bridal magazines and leaving them on my coffee table, claiming it was just for fun. I told myself this was normal. We'd been together over a year, she was 29, so marriage was obviously on her mind. But it started to feel less like natural relationship progression and more like a calculated campaign. The hints turned into direct conversations. She'd ask when I thought people should get engaged, what kind of wedding I'd want, how many kids I saw myself having. Every time I tried to pump the brakes, or say I wasn't ready to think about that, her mood would completely shift. She'd go from laughing and happy to cold and distant in about 5 seconds. Sometimes she'd tear up, saying I didn't take our relationship seriously. Other times, she'd just go silent and leave my apartment without a goodbye. The craziest part was that the next day, she'd act like nothing had happened. She'd text me good morning with heart emojis and suggest dinner, as if we hadn't just had a massive fight. I started to realize that Chloe had this pattern of emotional instability where she'd blow up, make me feel like the bad guy, then reset everything and expect me to just move on without ever resolving the actual issue. Her ex-boyfriend, Nathan, started coming up in conversations more frequently around month 15. At first, I thought she was just being honest about her past. But then I noticed she only mentioned him when we were fighting about commitment. She'd say things like, "Nathan wanted to marry me," or "Nathan would have proposed by now." I'd just sit there, wondering why she kept comparing me to a guy she supposedly didn't want anymore. I did some light social media stalking, I'm only human. Nathan was this successful real estate developer who drove a luxury car, wore expensive suits, and still followed Chloe on Instagram, liking most of her posts. The whole thing gave me this sick feeling. It seemed less like she was over him and more like she was keeping him as a backup plan. Around month 18, things got worse. Chloe started making wedding venue visits, coming back to tell me about a beautiful barn in Oregon or an elegant ballroom downtown. I felt like I was being pulled into a current I couldn't escape. I tried to have an honest conversation one night at her apartment. I told her, I care about you, but I'm not ready for marriage yet. She completely lost it. She started crying and yelling that I was wasting her time, that she could be with someone who truly valued her, that her biological clock was ticking. I was selfish for not committing. I remember sitting on her couch feeling like the villain in a movie I hadn't auditioned for. When I tried to defend myself, she just cried harder, saying I didn't understand what it was like to be a woman approaching 30. The next morning, she texted, "I'm sorry. I love you," and suggested brunch, as if nothing had happened. That's when I truly started to understand this pattern was never going to change unless something drastic happened. But I loved her, or at least I thought I did. So, I kept going along with it, hoping things would magically get better. Looking back, that was incredibly stupid of me. Then came the night that changed everything. Honestly, I should have seen it coming. Chloe had been extra sweet all week, cooking dinner at my place, being affectionate, not mentioning marriage once. I actually thought maybe we'd turned a corner. It was a cold night in January. We were sitting at my dining table, eating spaghetti she'd made. Everything felt comfortable, normal. And then she looked at me with this completely calm expression and said, "I need to tell you something important." My stomach immediately dropped. I knew whatever was coming wasn't good. Chloe put down her fork, looked me straight in the eyes with that eerily calm expression, and said, "If you don't propose to me by Valentine's Day, I'm going back to Nathan." The whole room went silent, except for the frantic hammering of my own heart. I sat there, frozen, trying to process what she'd just said. This wasn't a conversation or a discussion. This was an ultimatum, delivered like she was negotiating a business deal. The crazy part was how casual she sounded, as if she were telling me what she wanted for breakfast. She explained that Nathan had been texting her recently, that he'd told her breaking up was the biggest mistake of his life, that he was ready to propose whenever she wanted. She said all of this while looking at me like she expected me to panic and immediately pull out a ring. I could see in her face that she thought this was a brilliant strategy. She believed threatening to leave me for her wealthy ex-boyfriend would make me realize what I was about to lose and force me to commit. But instead, something completely different happened inside my brain. I looked at her, sitting there so confident, so satisfied with herself. And I felt this wave of clarity wash over me, so intense it almost felt physical. I realized this woman didn't love me. She was trying to trade me like a stock that wasn't performing well enough. The thought kept running through my mind, if someone truly loves you, they don't threaten to leave you for someone else unless you marry them. They don't use another person as leverage to manipulate you into the biggest decision of your life. And they definitely don't set arbitrary deadlines like you're some kind of work project. I took a deep breath and said, "That's fair." I watched her face light up with a triumphant smile. She thought she'd won. She thought I was agreeing to her terms, that a proposal was now inevitable. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand, starting to chatter about how she knew I'd understand, how happy we'd be, how Valentine's Day would be perfect for an engagement. I just sat there, nodding, my brain already 3 steps ahead, planning something completely different. The rest of dinner was surreal. She was chattering away about wedding ideas and honeymoon destinations, while I was having this intense internal conversation with myself about what I was actually going to do. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly saw a situation with perfect clarity, where all the confusion just evaporated and you knew exactly what you had to do? I wasn't thinking about buying a ring or planning a proposal. I was thinking about the fact that I'd just been given an ultimatum by someone who claimed to love me, and how fundamentally messed up that was on every possible level. The phrase that kept repeating in my head was, I wasn't being chosen, I was being forced. And once I thought that, I couldn't unthink it, because it was so obviously true. Chloe didn't want to marry me specifically. She wanted to get married before she turned 30, and I was just the guy who happened to be there. If I didn't comply, she had Nathan waiting in the wings like an understudy, ready to take my place. I realized that if I proposed under these conditions, I'd be walking into a marriage that started with blackmail. That would set the tone for the rest of my life, because she'd know that threatening to leave me was an effective tool to get whatever she wanted. That night, after I drove home, I sat in my living room until 3 a.m, thinking through every possible outcome. I came to the conclusion that I had to end this relationship, but I had to do it in a way that was clean and final. I knew Chloe well enough to know that if I just broke up with her over text, or at one of our apartments, she'd cry and manipulate and promise to change. I'd probably cave, because I'm not great with emotional confrontation. I needed to do it in a public place where she couldn't make a huge scene, somewhere neutral where I could say what I needed to say and then leave. And that's when the idea hit me. Valentine's Day was 3 weeks away. Chloe was expecting a proposal at a nice restaurant. So, why not give her the nice restaurant and the public setting, just not the outcome she was anticipating? The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. She'd be so focused on getting engaged that she wouldn't see the breakup coming. By the time she realized what was happening, it would already be done. Over the next 3 weeks, Chloe was the happiest I'd ever seen her. She genuinely believed she'd manipulated me into proposing. Watching her walk around in this delusional bubble of confidence was almost sad. She got her nails done in a specific shade of pink she said would photograph well with a ring. She kept leaving little notes around my apartment with her ring size written on them, like I might forget. She told all her friends something big was happening on Valentine's Day. She bought a new red dress that probably cost $400. She even made a hair appointment at some fancy salon downtown for the morning of. Meanwhile, I was systematically removing myself from her life in ways she didn't notice, too focused on her fantasy engagement. I took all my stuff out of her apartment over the course of 2 weeks, just a few items each time I visited, so she wouldn't get suspicious. I changed my streaming passwords, and made sure my name wasn't on anything of hers that could cause problems later. I called my buddy Mark, who's a lawyer, and asked him hypothetically if there was anything I needed to worry about legally when breaking up with someone. He told me as long as we didn't live together and didn't have any shared assets, I was fine, which was a huge relief. The hardest part was booking the restaurant. I wanted somewhere nice enough that she'd believe a proposal was happening, but not so expensive that I'd regret spending the money when I broke up with her instead. I settled on this Italian place called the Cascades in Pioneer Square. White tablecloths, dim lighting, known for romantic dinners. When I made the reservation, the host asked if we were celebrating anything special. Something like that, I said, which felt darkly funny. I also told my brother Ben what I was planning, because I needed someone to know in case Chloe tried to spin some crazy story afterward. He thought I was insane, but also said if I was going to do it, at least make it memorable. I guess I took that to heart. The week before Valentine's Day, Chloe started acting extra sweet and affectionate, probably to make sure I was still on board. She kept saying things like she couldn't wait for our special day, with this knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She had no idea I'd already mentally ended the relationship and was just waiting for the right moment. And there was something almost peaceful about having made the decision, all the anxiety and pressure just evaporated. Valentine's Day finally arrived. Chloe texted me early in the morning saying, "Today is going to be perfect," with about 15 heart emojis. I just responded with a simple "see you tonight," because I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to tip her off. She spent the entire day getting ready. Spa, elaborate curls, the red dress, expensive heels. When I picked her up at 6:30, she looked absolutely stunning, and completely convinced she was about to get engaged. The drive to the restaurant was torture. She kept talking about how romantic the night was going to be, how she'd always remember this day, how grateful she was that I'd finally come around to her timeline. I just gripped the steering wheel and focused on the road. We pulled up to the Cascades. The valet took my car, and as we walked toward the entrance, Chloe grabbed my arm and whispered, "This is perfect." And I thought to myself that she was right. It really was perfect, just not in the way she imagined. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just me and my thoughts processing what had just happened. When I got back to my apartment, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd just escaped something terrible. Chloe started texting me around 10 that night. First, angry messages about how I'd humiliated her in public. Then, sad messages about how we could work things out if I'd just listen. Then, threatening messages about how I'd ruined her life and everyone would know what kind of person I really was. I read the first 10 messages just to make sure there wasn't anything urgent. Then I blocked her number. I was done engaging with the drama and manipulation. I found out later through a mutual friend that Chloe had told everyone I cheated on her, which wasn't true. But most of our mutual friends could see through her version of events. They'd witnessed her behavior patterns over the years. That same friend told me that Chloe had gone back to Nathan within a week of our breakup. Which, honestly, just proved my point about her having a backup plan all along. She didn't need time to grieve or process. She just moved laterally to her next option, exactly like I predicted. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. I'd braced myself for more drama, but apparently Chloe was too busy with Nathan to keep focusing on me. My life slowly returned to normal over the next few months. I started going out with friends again without worrying about her reactions. I focused on my work. I even went on a few casual dates, though nothing serious. About 6 months later, that same mutual friend reached out and told me something that made the whole experience feel almost poetic. Apparently, Chloe had pulled the exact same ultimatum move on Nathan. She'd given him a deadline to propose, or she'd leave, probably using me or some other guy as the threat this time. And here's the kicker, Nathan broke up with her, too, because nobody wants to be manipulated into marriage, regardless of how much they might care about someone. I never reached out to Chloe again. And I never regretted my decision. Looking back, the only thing I regret is not ending it sooner, when the red flags first started appearing around that 1-year mark. The whole experience taught me something valuable about relationships and self-respect that I wish I'd understood earlier. Someone who truly loves you will never force you to prove it on their timeline, with their conditions. And they definitely won't threaten to replace you if you don't comply with their demands. Walking away from manipulation is always the right choice. Even when it's hard, even when you're invested, even when everyone around you thinks you should just go along with it to keep the peace. There's a difference between compromise in a relationship and surrendering your agency. I'd crossed that line so many times with Chloe that I'd almost forgotten what healthy boundaries looked like. That Valentine's Day dinner cost me $147 and a 2-year relationship. But it bought me something infinitely more valuable, my self-respect and my freedom to choose a partner who wants to build a life with me, not someone who wants to force me into one. There's only one thing more expensive than leaving a toxic relationship, and that's staying in one and paying for it with years of your life that you'll never get back. And I'm grateful every day that I chose the cheaper option. What do you think is the hardest part about recognizing manipulation in a relationship?